European leaders have released a joint statement condemning Donald Trump's threats to annex Greenland. Signed by the Danish Prime Minister and the leaders of France, Germany, Spain, the UK, Italy and Poland, the letter reiterates the island nation's sovereignty under Denmark, stating, "Greenland belongs to its people and only Denmark and Greenland can decide on matters concerning their relations."
Several European nations, including the United Kingdom, came together to voice serious concerns about the president's threats to impose more tariffs on European products unless the United States gets its hands on Greenland from Denmark. They made it clear that such actions could harm transatlantic relationships. Over in Brussels, EU ambassadors were busy holding emergency discussions. In the heart of Brussels, there's an urgent meeting among EU diplomats tackling President Trump's outrageous Greenland tariff threats, what Denmark has even called blackmail. Their aim has been to foster a constructive dialogue with their American allies since the start.
Ambassadors from the European Union's 27 member countries are holding an emergency meeting today to discuss President Trump's tariff threats. Trump says 8 NATO allies will face tariffs if they don't support his plan to take over Greenland. Meanwhile, people are taking to the streets in Copenhagen and in Greenland, sending a clear message. They do not want to be part of the United States.
And they made some progress last week, showing they are committed to continuing that conversation. They firmly support Denmark's sovereignty in all this. Now, let's talk about Trump for a moment. He seems to be pushing the narrative that the Supreme Court has handed him a kind of immunity, like a get-out-of-jail-free card. He wants everyone to think that the highest court took a good look at everything he's been accused of and just shrugged it off, proclaiming he's untouchable. He's been rallying with his supporters, claiming that no prosecutor can lay a finger on him, and that anyone still trying to bring charges is part of a political witch hunt, which he suggests the Supreme Court already halted.
New this morning, President Trump just said the United States needs Greenland and that anything less than total control is unacceptable. The question is, what is he willing to do about it? Given that the Prime Minister of Greenland says he does not want to be part of the United States, the people of Greenland do not want to be part of the United States, according to opinion polls. So the president just wrote that Greenland is, quote, vital for the golden dome that we are building and that NATO would be far more formidable and effective with Greenland in the hands of the United States. And then he said that anything less than that is unacceptable.
Honestly, if you only paid attention to Trump and his team, you might come away believing he's completely in the right. It would sound like the court gave him an invincible shield against all his legal troubles. But here's the kicker. That's not what the Supreme Court actually ruled. The reality is much more intricate than Trump's celebratory claims. If you take the time to read the ruling rather than just absorbing his spin, you'll realize that his so-called shield is riddled with significant gaps big enough that prosecutors at both state and federal levels are capitalizing on them to keep some of his most pressing legal cases alive.
They've been a great ally. We've had bases on there since World War II. Denmark has fought with us by our side in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I feel like it's incumbent on folks like me to speak up and say that these threats and bullying of an ally are wrong. And just on the weird chance that he's serious about invading Greenland, I want to let him know that it would probably be the end of his presidency. Most Republicans know this is immoral and wrong, and we're going to stand up against it.
And well, Trump is aware of this. And that's precisely why he's spinning the tale he is. I've noticed that he's been pretty vocal lately, throwing threats at judges and prosecutors who dare to pursue him. If the ruling really provided him the immunity he keeps claiming, he wouldn't have to be so loud. He could just relax and watch as his legal troubles faded away one after the other.
Are you thinking of giving people in Greenland to get them on board with a possible U.S. takeover?
I'm not talking about money for Greenland yet. I might talk about that. But right now, we are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor.
But that's not what's going down at all. In reality, judges are looking closely at what the Supreme Court actually ruled, and they're reading the words on the page. It turns out that a lot of Trump's actions don't fit within the protections the court established, and that has to be really unsettling for him. It's understandable to be worried because the cases that still hold weight are among the most politically charged and legally damaging ones any president has ever faced. In this country switching gears, I've seen that European troops have made their way to Greenland recently, signaling that they're serious about Arctic security.
NATO forces are on exercise in Greenland at a time when American designs on the island threaten the alliance's very existence. NATO has not confirmed its approval of the drills, which reportedly involve troops from Sweden, Germany, France, the Netherlands and Canada. Hosts Denmark framed it as part of a bolstering of Greenland's defences.
Meanwhile, Trump is asserting that the threat from China and Russia is so significant that only he can ensure Greenland's safety. Speaking of Greenland, let's clarify what this ruling really means. There's a huge difference between what Trump is saying about it and what it actually entails. Grasping that difference is crucial to understanding what's likely to transpire legally in the year to come. The Supreme Court made a big decision in the case of Trump versus United States, ruling 6-3 that former presidents have absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions considered core constitutional powers. This covers essential responsibilities like commanding the military, vetoing bills, and issuing pardons, meaning those actions can't lead to criminal charges once a president leaves office. I have to say this is a major ruling that carries significant weight. The court added that there's also a presumption of immunity for other official acts, which means activities a president does that may not be the core powers, but still fall under their official role. For those situations, the burden on prosecutors to overcome that presumption is really high. Honestly, this part of the ruling is a clear win for Trump, no doubt about it. Civil liberties groups like the ACLU have raised red flags, arguing that this ruling places presidents above the law in many situations. They weren't wrong to sound the alarm, as it marks a considerable shift in our understanding of presidential power in America. However, there's a crucial detail here that Trump tends to overlook during his victory celebrations. The court also stated something essential that turns the tide of this whole narrative. They made it clear that there is zero immunity for purely unofficial acts. None. Zero protection. If a president acts outside their official duties, whether they're doing so in a personal capacity, as a political candidate, or as a private business person, the shield of immunity simply doesn't apply. That key distinction between official and unofficial conduct is currently what keeps Trump's most significant legal troubles alive. It's a gap in his armor that is much larger than he would like to admit. Now let's dig into how this plays out in reality. The theory behind the ruling is one thing, but what's crucial is how judges and prosecutors are using it in the cases Trump is facing right now. The developments on that front should have Trump sweating, even if he'd never say it out loud. Let's start with the case related to January 6th, which is the one that's on most people's minds. When we talk about Trump's legal issues, it's been really interesting to see the Supreme Court's recent ruling on his immunity. They didn't just dismiss the January 6th indictment, which is something Trump and his supporters would like everyone to believe, but that's simply not true. What the court did was send the case back down to the lower court, where Judge Tanya Chutkan gets to sift through all the allegations in the indictment. She has to sort them into two groups. First, we have the official acts, which are things Trump did as president that might be protected by immunity. Then there's the second group, which includes unofficial acts, actions he took as a candidate or private citizen that aren't covered by immunity at all. This sorting is where the real legal tussle is happening now. Prosecutors are making the case that big chunks of Trump's behavior around January 6th don't fall under official acts. They argue that when he pressured state election officials to change the vote counts, that was definitely not a presidential duty. Seriously, since when does calling up a state official about vote counts count as part of the president's job? They also point out that his insistence on Vice President Mike Pence rejecting certified electoral votes wasn't exercising any core constitutional power. And let's not forget those fundraising emails he sent out, raking in hundreds of millions of dollars based on claims of a stolen election. Those were purely campaign-related and personal matters, completely separate from official presidential actions. Plus, his involvement with fake electors, where allies created fraudulent documents insisting he won states he actually lost. That was just a private political conspiracy, not something that falls under his role as president. What's fascinating about all this is that every time a judge sides with the prosecutors and categorizes one of those acts as unofficial, it chinks away at Trump's so-called shield of immunity. Each of those rulings creates another crack, keeping the door open for further prosecution. And that's precisely what's been unfolding piece by piece, ruling by ruling. It really shows just how the legal landscape is evolving. So there's this idea about how strong Trump's immunity really is when it faces the reality of a courtroom. Judge Chuck Kahn has been meticulously working his way through the indictment, looking at each claim, listening to arguments from both sides, and figuring out what counts as official and what doesn't. While some actions are protected, a lot of significant ones aren't. And that's what really matters for what's coming next in these cases. The whole process has been quite slow and tricky, without a doubt. That ruling on immunity did manage to delay things and force prosecutors to rethink their strategies, making everything feel a bit messier and lengthier. But it's important to note that delay doesn't mean dismissal, and complicated situations aren't the same as impossible ones. The case, despite all the chaos Trump has created, is still very much alive and kicking. There's still evidence that's troubling for Trump and his legal team that falls under the unofficial category. Now, shifting gears a bit to what's happening outside the federal case shows just how much weaker Trump's immunity really is. It's almost like Swiss cheese with all its holes. The Supreme Court's immunity ruling only applies to federal criminal prosecutions tied to presidential actions. It's crucial to hang on to that information because it shapes the entire landscape. This ruling doesn't automatically wipe out state criminal cases or civil lawsuits, and it sure doesn't shield Trump from facing any prosecution related to things he did as a private businessman. Whether that was before, during, or after his presidency, that limitation is pretty massive. Yet Trump doesn't seem to mention it when he's out there claiming the Supreme Court has made him untouchable. This means the New York case, where he's facing issues over falsified business records and hush money payments, is still very much active. That case revolves around actions that have nothing to do with any official presidential duties. Seriously, falsifying business records at a private company, that's not part of the president's constitutional powers, and let's not even get started on making hush money payments to cover personal scandals during a campaign. That's definitely not an official act of presidency. Those are just private actions by a private citizen for personal reasons, and the immunity ruling doesn't cover them at all. Simply put, let's break this down. The situation in Georgia is pretty serious, where Trump and his associates are accused of trying to overturn the election results. This includes that notorious phone call where Trump basically asked Georgia's Secretary of State to help him find enough votes to win. Now, the prosecutors over there are making a strong case that what Trump did wasn't part of his official duties as president. Instead, it looks like a political candidate trying to rig the state elections. And state prosecutors absolutely have the right to take action on this, no matter what the Supreme Court has said about federal immunity for official acts. Now, here's where things get really interesting and honestly a bit concerning for Trump. The Supreme Court's ruling didn't just give him a protective shield, it also opened up a whole new front for legal battles. This new battlefield is in the lower courts, where district and appellate judges have a lot of power. They're the ones now deciding case by case what really counts as official presidential conduct and what doesn't. Think about the implications of that for a moment. Each time a lower court judge determines that one of Trump's actions wasn't official, that immunity shield he relies on becomes a bit less effective. For instance, if a judge rules that call he made wasn't an official act, or that his fundraising attempts didn't count as presidential duties, or even that pressuring state officials to change vote counts falls outside presidential authority, then another layer of protection disappears. The tricky part is that Trump can't control these rulings. He can't pressurize district judges into saying his actions were all official. His social media statements won't change the facts laid out in courtrooms either. Sure, he can appeal every decision, and we all know he will, but the courts are already in the process of distinguishing official from unofficial conduct across the country. And what the judges are finding repeatedly is that a lot of what Trump did actually falls on the unofficial side. That's the real story behind Trump's moment of celebration. It's a reality he doesn't want to acknowledge. Yes, the Supreme Court gave him a shield, but it's not the invincible protection he might have hoped for. The situation is quite complicated and definitely not just a simple legal matter. We're looking at something much bigger, issues of power and accountability. That question whether any president, no matter how influential, can truly be above the law in the United States. It's fascinating how the Supreme Court recently made a ruling on presidential immunity. They set up a new standard that allows presidents more protection for their official actions than ever before, which is a significant change that no previous court has spelled out so clearly. This creates a major expansion of presidential power with long-term implications that will likely be felt for years, even after Trump steps out of the spotlight. Civil liberties groups have rightly raised concerns about this because the president could endanger the future of American democracy. It means that not just Trump, but future presidents might try to use this ruling to dodge accountability for a range of actions that could have been prosecuted in the past. That's a real shift in the balance of power within our government, and it should be a concern for everyone, no matter how they feel about Trump himself. However, there's an important detail that often gets overshadowed in all this chatter. The court did not hand over complete immunity to presidents. They didn't announce that a president can act however they want without consequence, which is something that should be clear to everyone following this situation. Judges are carefully applying the law and examining the facts rather than getting swayed by posts on social media or fiery speeches at rallies. They're keeping alive cases that Trump wishes would just disappear. And it's crucial to understand all of this if we're going to make sense of what's truly happening behind the scenes amidst all the noise and drama. Trump's recent behavior really shows just how worried he is about his legal troubles. He's been acting like the Supreme Court gave him a protective fortress, something no judge or prosecutor could ever touch. But what they actually created is more like a fence around the official responsibilities of the presidency, with a clearly marked gate that prosecutors can use whenever they prove his actions were more personal or political than presidential. Prosecutors in various jurisdictions are definitely taking advantage of that gate right now. They are meticulously sifting through his unofficial actions, building cases that revolve around what the judges and justices themselves have noted isn't protected. It's interesting to see how they're using the court's words and legal reasoning to hold Trump accountable. And in response to all this, Trump's reactions have been exactly what you'd expect from someone who knows their legal position has weakened. He's out there screaming, threatening judges, and attacking prosecutors while claiming that the legal system is corrupt and rigged against him. It almost feels like he's desperately trying to convince everyone that the ongoing cases are unfair because deep down he knows if they go to trial and juries get to see the evidence, the results could be disastrous for him. This isn't the behavior of a guy who feels secure in his immunity. It's more like the actions of someone who's terrified that his defenses won't hold up. He's trying to discredit the entire legal process before it can actually deliver a verdict. Meanwhile, the judges and prosecutors pushing these cases are not falling for it. They see right through his tactics and aren't intimidated by his threats or outbursts on social media. They are committed to doing their jobs following the law, as the Supreme Court wrote it, and pursuing the evidence wherever it takes them, no matter how loud Trump gets. As I look ahead toward the rest of 2026 and beyond, it feels like we're facing a mix of major uncertainty. But if you dig a little deeper, there's still a chance for accountability. The federal case concerning January 6th is far from over. It's been restructured and delayed, but it's definitely not dead. We've also got that New York case about falsified business records that is still very much moving through the courts. On a state level, prosecutions are continuing, especially in places where the recent ruling on immunity doesn't really apply at all. Judges in lower courts are actively working out what counts as official versus unofficial conduct. And every ruling that tips the scale toward unofficial behavior creates new paths for prosecution that his immunity can't shield him from. Sure, the process has taken longer than many people would have liked, And without a doubt, the immunity ruling has made it tougher for prosecutors trying to build their cases. You could definitely say that Trump has used legal delays and fancy footwork to push many of these proceedings past their peak political impact. But let's not forget that the law is still there, along with the evidence and the cases. The idea that no president is completely above the law might be battered by this ruling, but it hasn't been wiped out entirely. It's been complicated and narrowed down, making enforcement trickier, yet it still exists. The text of the Supreme Court's opinion and the distinction between official and unofficial acts are alive and well, and judges are currently applying that distinction to what Trump did. That's really what's going on behind all the noise and threats, the social media posts, and those moments of celebration. Trump received a shield from the Supreme Court, but that shield isn't without its significant gaps. The prosecutors still chasing him know precisely where those gaps are, and they aren't going to stop pushing until they've taken advantage of every last one of them. So that's where we stand right now. No matter your stance on Trump, whether you think he's innocent or guilty, one thing is clear. This struggle is far from finished. That immunity ruling isn't the final chapter in his legal saga. We're really just at the start of a new and more complex chapter here. In this chapter, that shield he always boasts about is going to face numerous tests, and it's going to get tough. The outcomes will impact not just his future, but also how we view presidential accountability in America. For many years, to